And then I just want to introduce Paul. A little bit hard to introduce this man. He's phenomenal, and you're about to see that. So Paul Emmerich France is a national board certified teacher, reading specialist, and author of multiple books. He spent 10 years as an elementary school teacher in both public and independent schools. He now serves as a consultant and coach, working with teachers on humanizing their teaching and making it more sustainable. In 2023, Paul founded Make Teaching Sustainable, an organization committed to helping schools find sustainable practices. He also hosts the Make Teaching Sustainable podcast, which you can find on all of your typical podcast places. With that, I'm thrilled to introduce you to Paul, and he can talk a little bit more about his brand new book with Corwin. So I'll turn it to you, Paul.
Awesome, thanks. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for spending your Monday afternoon and or evening with me. I'm really excited to talk to you about how to get kids writing today. As Jess said, I was an elementary school teacher for about 10 years, and now I spend a lot of time consulting and coaching teachers in classrooms. A couple people I work with are actually here today, which is awesome. And this is what I am hearing from so many teachers. You'd be really hard pressed to find a teacher who doesn't want their students writing more, but a lot of them really struggle to write for a number of reasons. And so today we're going to talk about how to advance achievement through cross-curricular writing. And I'll overview kind of our objectives here in a second, but the goal today is for you to walk away with 1 or 2 actionable steps that you can do tomorrow, or if you're on spring break, you can do next week. You can try out as you close out the year, and then use some of these tips to plan for next year. Jess did introduce me, but I wanted to tell you just a little bit more about me. She did mention that I taught elementary school for 10 years. I'm sure some of you in here are middle school and maybe even high school folks. And I get this question a lot, can these strategies, because I have that elementary school bias, can these strategies work with middle school and high school kids? And absolutely they can. In fact, if your students are struggling to write in middle and in high school, we need to look to the elementary methods that support emerging writers, because those methods, those scaffolds, can support adolescent writers and readers as well. I have opened 3 schools related to personalized learning. Personalized learning continues to inspire my work. Actually, my first book was on personalized learning. And one of the things I love about cognitive writing through journaling is that it plugs really nicely into that idea of sustainable personalization. And yeah, I currently help teachers make their practice more sustainable using my 6 mindset shifts for sustainable teaching. And when I facilitate professional learning, I like to practice what I preach. I believe that in order to learn, you have to be interacting and you have to be engaged. So I am going to ask you at points to what I call stop and jot in the chat. And I'm going to give you some writing scaffolds to help you stop and jot. So try and notice while we're spending time together today, how I support writing in this context, because there's some of the same strategies that we'll use for kids in classrooms as well. I also wanted to point out that if you'd like to follow me on Blue Sky or on Instagram, you can find me at Sustain Teaching. And then if you want to reach out to me directly, my email is paul@maketeachingsustainable.org. And I'd love to hear from you and chat with you more. So feel free, and I'll put all this up at the end too, but please feel free to reach out. So our learning intentions for today are, so many of us, I'm assuming you're here because you are also grappling with the challenge of getting students to write more. Students routinely struggle with open-ended writing prompts. And so what that means is, you give them a question and there's blank lines. They struggle to formulate, sometimes complete sentences, sometimes even just an idea. So we're going to learn to use cognitive writing as a means for writing across all disciplines. So everyone here, whether your specialty is mathematics, science, social studies, art, PE, any subject area, we are all writing teachers, and we're all going to be writing across the disciplines. We want to build student stamina for on-demand writing tasks. And the beauty of journaling is it also generates student-driven evidence of learning. So there's a whole assessment component today. As I mentioned already, I want you to watch how I scaffold writing for you as we learn together today. These are our success criteria. I want you to leave being able to define cognitive writing, describe the research that supports it, identify examples of cognitive writing across I shouldn't say all subjects, across many subjects and disciplines. And then we're going to describe what this lesson structure can look like. Now, again, I practice what I preach. I know all of us are in different places with writing. And so my intention is that everyone has access points into this work, even if you're not ready to go full on journaling. And so that's why I've created this continuum of sorts. If you're just entering into this pedagogy of cognitive writing, if you're emerging into it and you have some knowledge base and you want to grow it, the ideal phase is that light blue at the end. So ideally, we want to get to a place where cognitive writing is integrated into your assessment practices and students are actually engaged in consistent self-reflection through writing. We want you to be able to plan proactively for cognitive writing within your unit plans, identifying scaffolds that will support all learners in accessing writing and identifying those scaffolds proactively, right? Not just in the moment. We want you to be able to do both. And then finally implementing. When you've reached the ideal phase of this, cognitive writing is just a way of being in the classroom. It's something that kids know they're supposed to do. And oftentimes you don't have to ask them to do it because they just know. They open up their journal and then they write about their learning. Now you might be at some, different places within this in different categories, but this is generally speaking, kind of the progression from entering into this work to that ideal phase. If we had more time, I would invite everybody to, go into the chat and write where they are. If you want to do that right now, you're more than welcome to. Just let me know if you're entry level, if you're emerging, if you think you're emerging or you're in the ideal phase already and you're looking to hone, your skills here. But just having that awareness of where you are, can help inform your next steps. Thanks. Yeah, some of you are already doing it. I love it. I love it. I love it. A lot of members emerging, very beginning, emerging. Awesome. So again, the goal here today, right, is that everybody, no matter where you are in this, can identify at least one or two things you can try tomorrow, later this week, next week, through the end of the school year. Awesome. Lots of beginning folks. That's great. Yeah, I mean, that's just where a lot of people are right now. So if you are in that entry, that beginning, like that is where a lot of people are right now. There's kind of this renewed interest in making sure kids can write across the disciplines. And I think it's great. So consider this. Students only learn what they think about. This is from Willingham, professor of cognitive psychology and neuroscience at the University of Virginia. We want students, obviously, it kind of feels like an obvious statement, right? We want kids to be thinking about what they're learning about. However, a lot of times in our classrooms, we don't have the pedagogies or the mechanisms or the tools to ensure that kids are actually thinking about what we want them to think about or what we want them to learn. And so journals offer an opportunity for us to really tangibly see, are our kids thinking about what we want them to be thinking about? We're going to start with our first two success criteria today. We're going to define cognitive writing, and we're going to describe the research that supports cognitive writing. Also, I meant to say, you're welcome to put questions and comments in the chat as we go. I can't guarantee that I can get to all of them, but again, you have my email, you have my handle on social media, and please feel free to reach out to me. There'll also be a little survey at the end, so you can put your contact info in there for me as well. But if I see a question or a comment that I feel like really would drive the conversation forward, I will snatch it and respond to it if I can. So let's start with this question. What is cognitive writing? It's kind of an intuitive term, but let's take a second to really define it for ourselves. Cognitive writing engages learners in extended writing assignments and supports their comprehension through high-level processing of new learning. So really what we want with cognitive writing is we want kids to be writing about their learning. That could mean that they're summarizing key learnings by describing methods or articulating arguments or consolidating learning. When we consolidate learning, we take what's happened over the course of a learning block and sort of summarize it into a succinct statement. Maybe that's an enduring understanding or a really big idea that you want kids to take away. We might shape ideas, with kids through cognitive writing. You can see an example here on the right. I did it by measuring with my fingers. And I also noticed that all of the ones and twos are in the same spot, right? Kids are articulating what they're doing. And by doing this, they are more likely to retain and better understand the concepts that we want them to retain and understand because they've taken the time to, process it internally and then generate a statement that shows what they know. Cognitive writing could look like using graphic organizers. It could look like using thinking strategies to help students think critically about content. Those of you that are fans of Project Zero, a lot of the writing structures I offer are inspired by Project Zero's writing structures like Think, Puzzle, Explore, or Notice, Think, Wonder. Cognitive writing can allow for regular writing exercises in short bursts to build writing fluency. So you'll see on the right-hand side here, cognitive writing doesn't have to be a 5-paragraph essay. In fact, that is what is unsustainable for many teachers, when it comes to writing instruction. It's that they don't have time to bring kids to fruition on a really long piece, but they just want them writing regularly. This can be done, a reflection like you see on the right-hand side there can be done in 90 seconds to 2 minutes, embedded into instruction. And that will build writing fluency with time. Additionally, cognitive writing could look like revising entries to clarify ideas or elaborate on thinking. So you're going to see an example of that here in a second. But that revising element, not only is it a research-based strategy for building the capacity to write, but it's also a great way to get kids reflecting on what they've done well and maybe what they haven't done well, what they've made mistakes with. And again, it gets them to internalize and process those errors or those successes so that we increase the likelihood that they retain them for future tasks. So I've sort of addressed some of the why behind this. And again, I think a lot of us that are here, we probably already have a clear purpose around why we want kids writing more. Some of it's rather intuitive. The first of which is writing fluency, right? The more kids read, the more fluent they become as readers. The more kids write, the more fluent they become as writers. And so we want kids writing as much as possible. Obviously, that challenge is, how do we scaffold for them? So what you see on the right here is an example of a math journal. And this would be something that I would recommend teachers do as often as possible. The last time I was teaching full-time, when I had my own self-contained classroom, I was teaching 3rd grade, we did this every single day. And kids learned how to articulate their thinking. This is obviously a math task. Articulate their thinking, summarize their thinking in a new learning statement, and then reflect on what they were going to do next. So you can see that one student's reflecting, the top student there is reflecting on another student's method, saying that Aubrey's method showed me there are multiple ways to do this. The student at the bottom said, now I know what to do by making my model the same. And a little more context there, this week of instruction was all about comparing fractions, as you probably can tell. And a lot of students struggled with the idea that the wholes have to be the same size in order to compare. And so that's what that student was getting at with that reflection. But you can see, right? This is the same lesson, same task. You can see how personalized it is. Not because I gave each child their own task, but because I trained them to be able to articulate their thinking and their learning. And so they've taken this task and personalized it to themselves through writing. And so that's why the second why of cognitive writing is personalization. My first book, Reclaiming Personalized Learning, is all about personalized learning. And it's really about some of the misconceptions many people have about personalized learning that make it unsustainable. Personalized learning is not individualized learning. It doesn't mean we need to make individualized curricula for each of our kids. Instead, it means we need to use teaching strategies that allow kids to internalize and make the curriculum meaningful and relevant to them. And that's what you can see in these reflections, that kids are writing things they learned and their individual reflections that will fuel for future learning for them. Cognitive writing, I believe, to be a very sustainable practice. It really puts the onus on the kids. The kids have to be carrying more of the cognitive load than the teachers. And that is, truthfully, where I think so many of our issues with sustainability in teaching come. The teachers are trying to do too much on behalf of the kids. We've got to let go a little bit of the control. We've got to allow things to be a little bit messy and a little bit imperfect so that the kids are doing more of the thinking and carrying more of that cognitive load. When we do that, our teaching becomes more sustainable. Another really big why, which I've already alluded to and already mentioned, is retention. And there is research behind this, that writing across all subject areas can, quote, reliably enhance learning. So there's research to back it up. It's also just intuitive, right? If we have kids writing about, and in their own words, not copying off the board what the teacher says to write, but writing in their own words what they're taking away from lessons, they're internalizing those lessons, and then they are much more likely to retain those and remember those. And If by some chance they don't remember, because you have this beautiful artifact of learning, they can just easily flip back to the prior day and see what their new learning statement was the day before, or see what their reflections were from the day before. In fact, I encourage teachers who are using this approach to start their lessons by having kids take out their journals and look at what they did the day before, so they can use those ideas in the next task. In the context of these two tasks right here that you see, a lot of them were taking away the idea that they need their holes to be the same size. Well, I want them retaining that so that they can use it in future tasks. And a great way to do that is to use the journals they've created, their words, to help jog their memories. I see a comment here that caught my attention. I love the idea of kids writing their thinking, summarizing their strategy. How would you deal with students shortcutting this by writing very short responses, not full sentences, etc.? Is this a thing that you use? Very good. Yeah, so there's an element here of success criteria, and holding kids accountable to it. I'm going to show some rubrics here in a little bit, but holding kids accountable to the success criteria you set for them. So that should be complete sentences, capital letters, periods, finger spaces, all that kind of stuff. You have to hold kids accountable to that. Now, if kids don't do it, accountability sometimes I feel like is a word that really grinds people's gears, or like it sounds like it's not child-centered, but I actually think accountability is super child-centered, because it's us saying, I care about your learning, and so I'm going to hold you accountable to the learning. So what I do to kids is I say, wow, you did a great job on this. Like, I can see you did a lot of thinking, but I'm seeing you're not meeting some of our success criteria. So I want you to do a second draft of this journal. It's not redo it because you did a bad job. It's part of writing is rewriting. And so I want you to rewrite this journal, do a second draft of it to show me that you can meet our success criteria. So that's a strategy I use to hold them accountable to it. I also think, you're saying you ask them to explain every now and then, but there's a lot of pushback and low effort. I would like to reframe that. And this, comes from just a core belief of mine. I think that kids who seem like they're not putting effort into their writing, they're probably doing so because it's hard for them, right? And I think that is the most generous, I think, interpretation of that behavior. And I think we should, afford our kids that generosity, and assume that, like, wow, if they're kind of cutting corners on this, it must be really hard for them. And so as teachers, when we go, if something's really hard for them, what does that mean? Well, if something's really hard for them, it means we must teach them and provide them scaffolds so that it's not as hard for them. And so we build their fluency. And so what I would challenge you to do is when they push back, ask why, collect some more data, and figure out why writing is so challenging for them, and then teach those skills so that it becomes less challenging. It's a great question. So this is an example of what this could look like in math. If you were with me in person, you'd all have a cute little journal, and you'd all be doing this right along with me. I'm going to show you what this can look like, virtually today. But what we do is we offer kids, an open-ended task, something like what you see in front of you. Aziz has 5 times as much money as B. Carlos has $12 in his bank account, and B has half as much money as Carlos. If they pool their money together, do they have enough to buy a new Switch game for $50? So, you spend some time in the start of your lesson making sense of this task, making sure the kids know what it's saying. You might even allow them to turn and talk about strategies they're going to use. And at this point, we're assuming, you've built the routines and modeled this enough that they know kind of how to set their journal up like this. For math, I like to do my method, my thoughts, and then my reflection. But there's all different ways you can do this, right? What I like to say to teachers is it's not really the specific structure that matters. It's that you have a writing structure. That's what matters, because kids need structure. And when they struggle, it's oftentimes like they're not sure what to do. And we need to provide them that structure and that sense of, predictability so that they feel successful and they know what to do. So then you give them time to write out their method. There's my method. See, Aziz, Carlos, and B. And then you give them time to write out their thoughts. So you're going to see on the left-hand side here, I offered some sentence starters for kids so that they know you can use temporal words here to show what you did first, what you did second, what you did third, what you did fourth. And give them time to write out their method and then write out their thoughts. and I'm waiting for someone to point out the error that's on here. Do you see the error? There we go. Thank you. So funny story, actually. I've done this task a million times, and I actually accidentally made this mistake in front of a group of teachers recently. But what was great about it was authentic, right? Like this happens in our classrooms all the time. And this is where that pedagogy of cognitive writing, we have to let go of perfection, right? We have to let our kids make mistakes mindfully, right? Mindfully make mistakes, not making careless mistakes, not wasting instructional time. But like kids are going to make these kind of mistakes in the classroom. And so after kids have a chance to grapple with the task on their own, what I generally do is bring all the kids together and share journals on the document camera, or I take pictures and put them up on the screen so we can compare different methods. And there's a whole pedagogy for comparing those methods and creating a story of methods and helping kids reflect on different types of methods. But then, we stop and we synthesize. So my hope would be a student who made an error like this would see from other methods that they made an error, and then they would be able to write about that. So this is one of those places with cognitive writing where kids can reflect, synthesize, consolidate. I made a mistake. I need to read more closely. Then they do a second draft of that model, right? And we see that Aziz actually should be 5 times 6 instead of 12 times 6. And then they write a final statement. They only have $48, which is actually not enough. So what this does is, it allows kids to grapple. It allows kids to articulate their thinking, but we also don't just let it lie, right? We have to make sure we intervene and that they understand what they've done and whether or not it's correct. And then we give them a chance to reflect on that and revise it if they need to. So this is just one example of what this can look like in mathematics. And, I've sort of summarized that lesson structure so far, which is one of our success criteria. And I'll come back to this later. But, after you have that whole group synthesis where you compare the methods, then you give kids time to do rewrites and, reflections, maybe write a new learning statement, do the kind of stop and jot thing that I'm actually about to show you. But we really just want to embrace that imperfection and allow kids to write about their journey, because that's what this journal ends up being. It ends up being the story of their learning over the course of the whole year with these really, really personalized reflections, all captured in writing. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to stop and jot right now. And this is a great thing that we have to have kids do in their journals as well. When you want to stop and consolidate learning with everybody, you could make it really, really structured and just offer one stop and jot. Everyone's going to write a new learning statement. Everyone's going to write a key term down. Everyone's going to write a reflection. As this becomes that way of being and kids get, more proficient at doing this on their own, you can open it up and say, you can choose the stop and jot you want to do today. Maybe you want to write about a key term you learned, or maybe you want to write a fun fact or a feeling or a connection. So I want everybody in the chat right now to use the prompts below. What is cognitive writing and how might it enrich learning for all learners? I want you to stop and jot. Okay, now I'm recommending you do a new learning statement. I learned, you could use I learned as a sentence frame, or you could do a reflection. I was puzzled by. And if neither of those apply to you right now, you could do a key term. You could just say what cognitive writing means in your own words. You could write an aha moment. I realized something. You could write a big idea. You could write a feeling. I bet some people out there are feeling overwhelmed by this and wondering, where do I start? You could write that in the chat. So I'm going to be quiet for about 30 seconds and let everybody do a stop and jot of their choice in the chat. And we'll read some of them as they come in. Cool. I learned that cognitive writing is a way to engage students at the start of a class to ensure previous learning was retained. Structure is critical. Personalized learning is not individualized learning. Love that. Let's see. Students are able to retain the information, allow students to gather and organize their thoughts. I feel a bit confused as I join late. Thank you, Maureen. That's okay. Writing what they're thinking, tied to writing across the curriculum, allow students to reflect, easy to incorporate. Oh, they're coming in fast now. I realize that some of what I do for exit tickets fits the model of cognitive writing. I love that. I love when people see, oh, I'm actually kind of doing some of this already. You probably are doing some of this already. And so might be at more of that emerging phase where you have to where you can hone this more. I did see someone said something earlier too about just, kids not being able to write reflectively. And I think we have to remember that even if you have middle schoolers or high schoolers, if they've never been asked to write reflectively before, which is very common, right? A lot of kids are not asked to write reflectively. If they've never been asked to write about their thinking or about their mistakes or anything reflective before, you have to teach them how to do that, which means you have to show them models. You have to write in front of them. You have to give them lots of sentence frames. You got to show them lots of examples. You need to show them and give and really teach them how to do that. So I learned that writing doesn't have to be a long process. Yes, it does not. That's partially why this is so sustainable. It doesn't have to be, we're forming the perfect sentence or perfect paragraph, I should say. It can be 90 seconds and they write as much as they can. And if you do that every single day, right? 90 seconds to 2 minutes of writing, stop and jot every single day, what you will notice is that the majority of your class will become more efficient and more fluent, and they'll start naturally writing longer reflections. Very good. All right, we're going to move on. I could talk about all of this all day, so we're going to move on because we have a lot to get to. The next part of our success criteria. So at this point, my hope is that you can, define cognitive writing for yourself and describe some of the research that supports it. That really big one for me is the reliably enhancing learning. That research is so powerful to me. So I hope you can, if you have a notebook in front of you, jot that down. Keep that with you because that's the big one for me in terms of the research. Is the Stop and Jot table available as a resource? Well, actually it is. It's available in my new book, My Kids Can't Write. I'm trying to be kind of funny, but it's hard when we're on a webinar. But yes, it is available as a resource in the book. And I don't have it online currently, but it is available in the book, and I'm sure we could find a way to send a one-pager with that in it. I will talk to Jess about that later. But our next part here is we want to identify examples of cognitive writing across the subjects and disciplines, because a lot of people are probably wondering, what does this look like? And so I want to show you what it can look like. Now, again, I have a lot of elementary examples. I know we got some middle and high school folks in here. But again, if your kids struggle to write, you can consider these elementary examples and the scaffolds applied to help your most struggling writers. So I know that learning styles have long since been debunked, but I still hear this all the time, that writing is not certain kids' preferred learning style, and therefore we should be, letting them choose a different way to express their thinking. My personal opinion, and I really want to emphasize this, is that writing is not a learning style. In my classrooms, when I work with kids, writing is not something you can opt out of. I can scaffold it. I can have different expectations for different kids depending on their readiness levels, but it is not a learning style. It's a core modality for learning in our classrooms. Okay. And this is just such a big idea. And I hear this all the time that, kids aren't ready to write. Let's let them do, a recording or something like that. You can have them do that, but you also need to make sure you're holding them accountable to writing. But the question is, right, like, how do we do that if kids are struggling to write? And what we can do is consider, when we're planning for cognitive writing, is the complexity of task, okay? This is the solo taxonomy, and this is what I use to consider complexity of task. If you have kids who are really struggling with writing, giving them a very complex task is going to make writing hard for them to access. And so we need to consider the complexity of task, especially if you're one of those teachers that's in the entry level, right? If you're in the entry level of cognitive writing and your kids aren't doing a lot of writing, you're going to want to give them simpler tasks to start with, and then eventually grow to the more complex tasks. So this is actually, this has been around for a long time, from 1982. And you'll see there's several categories here: pre-structural, unistructural, multi-structural, relational, and extended abstract. And once you understand it, it's kind of intuitive, right? Unistructural is one relevant aspect. Multi-structural is several relevant aspects of a task. Relational helps them think about relationships between concepts or ideas. And then extended abstract is more about generalizations or synthesizing. So a lot of those reflections or consolidations of learning live in that extended abstract, area. And then you can see some verbs that go along with this. So Another really important part of planning for cognitive writing is knowing what your learning target is. Because if you know what your learning target is, if you're defining, then you know you're in that um, unistructural lane of the solo taxonomy, and then you're going to know what writing scaffold to give them. So it might just be that key term stop and jot. Or if you're describing something, it might be helping them generate a list of words they can use to describe something. So knowing where your task lies on the solo taxonomy is very, very important. I'm going to show you some examples of that in a second. The pre-structural lane here is as if students cannot yet access the task. And so that is where you have to ask yourself some questions. Do I need to modify this task? Is the task just too hard? Or is it a scaffolding issue? Do I need to just provide more scaffolds to help kids access the task? So this is an example of what a unistructural task could look like, where students focus on one relevant aspect of the task. This is a first grade example, and the student was writing about a main character. This is actually, we read the book Big Al. If you've never read it, it's a great book about friendships, and basically Big Al's problem is that he looks really scary, and so it's really hard for him to make friends. And so this was, for this child, it's kind of hard to read their writing, like we can name that, right? But they were able to access this task and write Big Al is scary and retain that, idea. It served as a great assessment of character, right? They're able to identify something about the character that is really central to who they are and what their challenge is. And it's just, again, one relevant aspect of the task. Multistructural is when students grapple with several relevant aspects of the task. So the last example was in, reading workshop. This example I did with fifth graders, and they were learning about banks. So this is like a financial literacy, social studies kind of topic that they were exploring. And in this one, I wanted kids to see the learning target was related to kids identifying all of the purposes of banks, right? So I wanted them to be able to grapple with several relevant aspects of banks, not just one. And so I used this writing structure called Try 10, which originally comes from Amy Buckner's work, which I learned about, it was probably like 15 years ago now. So it's been around for a while. It's a great resource if you're looking for, it's called Notebook Know-How. It's a great resource for getting kids to write more. She uses it more in terms of revising writing for, details. I use it to have kids write the same sentence frame many times, but then obviously the ideas change as they write more. So banks can give you a savings account. Banks can give you money loans. Banks can give you free checks. So they're writing all these different purposes of banks. Actually, this lesson was really cool because as they were reading the resource, one kid learned that you can put money in a savings account and that the bank will give you money for keeping money in a savings account. And that this idea was, none of them knew this, which I thought was just remarkable and just speaks to the importance of teaching financial literacy in schools. But they were just like, wait a second. So if we put the money in the bank will then give us money for keeping our money in there. And I was like, yeah, isn't that wild? And that's actually where the fun fact stop and jot was born from, was this lesson. And I said, let's all write this fun fact down right now, that if I leave my money in the bank, they will give me more money for my money. It was just such a big idea to them. And it was great to be able to capitalize on that through writing and get them to write something down they were really excited about. So this is multistructural, several relevant aspects of a task. The next one is relational, where students integrate information from a task to show a relationship. So this is a science task. This family tree up here you see comes from Amplify Learning. And what the kids were this learning target was related to kids understanding where flamingos get their colors from. And specifically flamingos, because the bigger idea was that we wanted them to see that animals get some of their traits from the environment, not just from genetics, right? And so we gave them a series of family trees, and they had to infer on their own this relationship between the type of food they eat and the color. And so that is a relational task where they have to take two things together and see a relationship. In this case, it's a cause-effect relationship. So this was third grade science, where the student infers that flamingos begin their lives as gray and turn pink as they mature. And it's related to the food they eat. So you can see in here too some of the sentence frames that we use, like I notice, I think. That was, given to them to scaffold their writing to start to see these relationships. And then this final one is extended abstract. So this is actually a place where we used a graphic organizer to scaffold writing. And this is related to third grade students who were reading Tuck Everlasting. So you can see in the right-hand side, that lower right-hand corner box, one of the students inferred, you don't want to live forever, right? And that's an example of an extended abstract writing prompt, right? Because you're generalizing information, you're pulling out this big, broad, general idea from something like a story. And that is hard to get to, right? If you haven't ensured that your kids can do these other tasks first. And that's why this solo taxonomy is so helpful, because you can see the amount of thinking that kids have to be able to do in addition to the writing, right? So those are those 4 phases. You might be, I hope what you're doing right now is considering, when you're asking kids to write, especially those of you who have said it's really hard for my kids to write reflectively, you might want to try, one of your action steps could be, try just giving them a unistructural task with just one relevant aspect, defining, describing, or maybe you're giving them multistructural where they have to, explain a couple relevant aspects of a task. See if they can do that, because if they can't do that, then it would make sense if they can't do the extended abstract reflective type of writing. And you might have to do some more scaffolding with those prior levels of task complexity in order to eventually get them here. All right, so let's stop and jot again. And I want you to use the prompts at the bottom to frame what you're going to write about right now. How might cognitive writing be used in your subject area? And why will you need to account for complexity of task? So you could use some key terms here, right? You could use some of the unistructural, multistructural, relational, sorry, I had a brain fart there, relational and extended abstract. You could ask a question. If you're not sure how cognitive writing could be used, you could ask a question. You could do a reflection like someone already did and say, I'm actually doing some of this already, but I'm still struggling with. You could share a feeling, or you could really share any one of these. But I want you to stop and consolidate learning for yourself. How might cognitive writing be used in your subject areas? How will you, or why will you need to account for the complexity of tasks? And I'm curious too, those of you that earlier said your kids really struggle with this, I wonder if this added information about complexity of task has changed your thinking at all. And you're thinking, oh yeah, I'm actually giving them extended abstract tasks, and I haven't looked to see if they can even do a unistructural or multistructural task yet. So take a second to stop and jot in the chat. I'll be quiet for a second. I love it. Someone just used, this reminds me. I can tell they're using the scaffolds I'm providing them. And they're saying, this reminds me that just defining and explaining the academic vocabulary for the task is a necessary lesson opportunity and complexity scaffold. Yeah, so like defining and explaining is something that we have to do with them. And then we have to teach them how to use that vocabulary. So this is where like the modeling comes into play. I like the try 10 strategy. Yeah, I love the try 10 strategy too, because it reinforces that rewriting idea, and it allows kids to just play with ideas. So if they write one try and it doesn't make sense, it's not erase that was wrong. It's let's try another one now, and I want you to refine this idea. So it reinforces the revising and rewriting strategy. I think it's a great way to expand my exit tickets. Great. I want to continue working, hoping to scale it back, explaining through the cool. Okay, yep. Visible, it definitely relates to visible learning. Could see using this in social studies as I have them take notes. Yes. Oh, I'm so glad you said this, because I've been in some middle school classrooms lately where they are having the kids take notes, and they're trying to do it in a way where the kids are, summarizing a little bit more, but a lot of kids are still just copying the notes off the board kind of mindlessly. So if you are in that, part of your practice is to have kids copy notes, right? And you want to keep that, you can, and you should if that's what you want to do. But a great way to make sure they're internalizing what they're writing is to have them stop and jot. Have them summarize a key idea in their own words, because it ensures that they're not just they're not only copying, but they're actually internalizing, which will again increase the likelihood that they will retain those key learnings down the road. You can have them write a question after they take notes. You can have them write a feeling down. You can have them write a connection. You know, we learned this last year or we learned this connects to what I learned last year. That's great. I love it. I love it. I realize that some teachers jump to the extended abstract without noting that students might need to do unistructural tasks. Absolutely. We cannot make assumptions. And when kids can't do something, we don't go, oh, they're just lazy or they don't care. We go, there's something they don't know. And we need to figure out what it is that they don't know and then teach them that thing that they don't know. Thank you so much for all your reflections. This is awesome. I hope we can get a transcript of this chat because I want to read through more of these thoroughly. All right, so this is the big part here. And unfortunately, you know, we've only got an hour today, so I'm gonna kind of jump through these scaffolds, but all of these scaffolds are in the book, so you can dig into them a little bit more. And what I want you to try and notice as you go is like, what's one scaffold I could try using with my students? You've already experienced a bunch, so you're gonna see something here and go, oh, we already did that today. But what's a scaffold I can use, again, tomorrow, later this week, next week when we return from spring break? What are some things I can try in these final months of school so that I know if I can use them in the fall when things start up again? Oh, I forgot I put this in here. Someone recently said to me, they were like, Paul, why do we have to have our kids writing? Because now AI can just write for them. And it just like broke my little teacher heart and my little writer's heart. You know, a lot of us are learning how to use AI, and I think it's great. I use it sometimes to help me generate ideas. However, we are able to use AI successfully as adults because we have already learned how to write. In order to engage with AI, kids are going to have command of the English language. Some people are like, oh, they can just pick up their phone and talk to it. But if they have never, if they don't have full command of the English language, it's going to be really hard for them to even talk to AI. So it's really important that our kids are learning how to write without AI so that eventually they can leverage a tool like AI, in the way that it's supposed to be used. It's not, and that's why I say it's not going to save our students from needing to learn to write. So we got to think about what scaffolding is first of all, right? Scaffolding isn't just helping kids. It's figuring out what they can do alone, what they can do with help, and what they cannot do yet. And then, once we know where they are, what they can do alone, what they can do with help, and what they cannot do yet, we give them something that temporarily allows us to carry the cognitive, physical, emotional, spiritual load of learning for them, and then we gradually release it with time. That's what scaffolding is supposed to be. So it's important to consider this, because if you're applying a scaffold and then the kids are using that scaffold for the rest of the year, it's likely that it's becoming more of a restrictive scaffold or something they're dependent on. So all of these scaffolds that I'm offering you should be things we gradually release with time. Just consider that. Frey et al. Actually categorize the different scaffolds, which I think is great. Front-end scaffolds are things we apply ahead of time. I use a lot of front-end scaffolding today in order to show you what it could look like to, set kids up for success with writing through, sentence frames and different writing structures. Back-end scaffolds happen after. Peer scaffolds come from collaboration. There's lots of different types of scaffolds, but the most important part is that we learn when to fade those scaffolds with time. So all of these scaffolds should be faded with time, because if we don't fade them with time, they become restrictive scaffolds and they actually hinder learning. And that's the last thing that we want to do. If anyone out there is a National Board Certified teacher, I find that the Architecture for Accomplished Teaching is really great. And if you're a coach also too, this is a great thing to share with teachers. But that, like, in order to figure out what the scaffolds are, we need to first know our students. You can see that bottom arrow. We need to know who they are, where they are, what they need, and then we set these goals with them. We implement the instruction, and that's where we implement those scaffolds. And then, after we've implemented the instruction, we evaluate, we reflect on their learning, and we do the same thing over and over again. And when we set those new high worthwhile goals, that might be the point where you wean them off of some of those scaffolds. On the right-hand side here, I have writing fluency norms. And I wanted to share this with you because, again, if you are one of those teachers that's saying, gosh, they're really not engaged in writing and they're not putting the effort in, they're being lazy with it. It's probably because they're not fluent writers. I think it's unlikely it's just they don't feel like doing it. They probably don't feel like doing it because they're not fluent writers. So one of the ways you can measure writing fluency is through a writing CBM. And if your kids are performing, below the 16th percentile or really low in terms of their grade level, then that's the thing you need to teach, right? You need to teach them how to become more fluent writers so that they are then more engaged in the process of cognitive writing. So I'm going to actually zip through that so we can go to our scaffolds. So this is a summary of the scaffolds. They're all right here. I'm actually going to go through all of these right now, so I'm not going to read this slide to you, but there's 12 of them I'm going to share with you today. The first is routines and rubrics. In order for kids to engage in cognitive writing and for it to become a way of being in the classroom, they need to have routines that show them how to engage with this. So for instance, in math workshop, the routine you see on the left-hand side here is one I used in order to get kids into the journaling process in mathematics. You turn to the next clean page, you put the task at the top, you read the task in your mind, and then come to the carpet. We make sense of the tasks together, and then they know to get started on the actual task itself and the writing. The right-hand side here is success criteria. So someone actually asked about this before as well. How do we hold kids accountable to making sure they're actually writing well? We use learner-friendly rubrics, and we have them rate themselves, based on, you see, I use this kind of plant metaphor in my rubrics. A seed is starting to, a seed is not yet, a sprout is starting to, and that plant is I've got it. But what I also like to do in my rubrics is leave space at the bottom because kids might add their own success criteria. This student in particular wanted to be sure they were using their best handwriting. And so they wrote that down. You can see they still have a little bit of work to do with that, but it's great that they're mindful of it and that they're articulating that in the rubric itself. So this scaffold learning because it reminds kids what they need to do in order to be successful writers. This is an example of a kindergarten rubric, so we can do this all the way down as early as can be. And this is an example of a visual rubric I did with a third grade class. The teacher was trying to get the kids to write more deeply. And so we created, and she was using this iceberg metaphor all the time, which the kids were really glomming onto. And so we decided to visualize this using an iceberg, giving kids, again, an example of what this can look like and scaffolding the writing for them. So sentence structures and sentence frames, you've already experienced this today. This reminds me of, I feel. The big idea is, we give them these sentence frames and these writing structures so that they have a sense of predictability. You'll see actually a child's hand is writing here on this anchor chart. One of the best ways to get them engaged in it is to let them write their ideas for what sentence frames they can use up on an anchor chart. So that this could be your simple action step that you do tomorrow or at the end of the week or next week, right? Start giving kids sentence frames. Such an easy thing to do that requires not a lot of planning. This is an example. This was a teacher who was trying to scaffold reflective writing, and she was linking back to her success criteria in the essay that she was having them write, and she was showing them the types of things they could write in response to some of the. Like if they, for instance, if they didn't have direct quotes as text evidence, then they could write, tomorrow I will add quoted text evidence to my piece. So she was really scaffolding the process of reflecting on their writing so that they could, initiate their own improvements to their work. Word walls and word study are also great scaffolds. Obviously, writing is a very word heavy, practice. They need to be able to recall domain specific words. They need to be able to spell well in order to be able to write. And I have a feeling, again, a lot of your kids, even in middle school and high school, that struggle to write or seem like they're just disengaged from writing, just the thought of spelling a word is probably so taxing for a lot of them that, they disengage from it. Because we all do that, right? When something's really, really hard for us, we tend to disengage from it. So you might consider, is this a vocabulary challenge? Or is this a spelling issue? Word walls and engaging in word study is a way to scaffold. You already saw some examples of graphic organizers or thinking maps. This helps scaffold the process of writing. We already looked at that example actually. Discourse is another great scaffold. So before you have kids go write, have them turn and talk to a neighbor or turn and talk in a group. It gets the ideas flowing. You could even, when they're in that group, like have them create a list in that group as they're talking. So they could create a bulleted list of words to use or ideas they might want to cover in their writing that day. In this instance, actually, this was really fun. Throughout the week, I was collecting theorems. So as kids were consolidating learning on their own and discovering things about fractions, I was writing them down as their theorem, like mathematicians would do. They were really into that, right? But it all came from discourse. It all came from kids talking to one another and sharing out. And so then I was able to take their words and put their words on the board, which is super, super validating for kids, especially as they're writing about, topics that are tough for them, like math. Some kids might need to just draw and label to start, and that's okay. If that's where they are and that's what they need to access the task, then that's what we should let them do. Class journals are great as well. So I like to write in front of the kids as much as I can, also a research-based strategy. So if your kids are really struggling to write, they might just need to see what this looks like to make that mental model so then they can start doing it on their own. The example on the left here is actually a student who was copying a lot of the class journal for a while, which I didn't really want her to be copying, right? But it was the only way that she would engage in the task is if she copied. And on this day, you'll see it says number 3 down there. I noticed flamingos eat shrimp. On that day, that was the first day that she was able to take my sentence starter and then write the rest of the sentence herself. I gave her, I noticed flamingos, and then she came up with eat shrimp. And I was really excited because that was the first day that she was able to, retrieve those words and put them on paper. And it was because we had been doing that class journal for so long. The example on the right there is just another example of a class journal. Again, giving kids a mental model for what it can look like to write about their thinking. They have to see lots of examples before they'll start to do it on their own. We talked about revising already as well. Doing a second draft is a great way to get kids writing more. So you can see this is from two consecutive days, April 23rd to April 24th. We did a little feedback. We looked at some examples, and then everybody did a rewrite the next day to kind of hone their ideas. You can see just the volume of writing is higher one day later. This is an example of the one on the left here is an example of revising partitioning. So this child had to revise the partitioning a circle into eighths 5 times before they got it right. In this conversation with this student, when I was sitting down with them, I wasn't going, no, you did it wrong. It was, all right, let's look at it. Do those parts look equal to you? No, they don't look equal. Great, write down, this is not equal. They did it again. This is still not equal. Right, and they did it 5 times until they got to where it looked the most accurate it had looked. So again, the idea of revising, right? It's not punitive. It's not you did this poorly, and so I'm gonna make you rewrite it or make you revise it or redo it because you did it poorly. This is part of the writing process. We just revise and rewrite. All writers do this. And the example on the right there is an example of using try 10. In this case, it's only try 4, but they rewrote the same thing multiple times until they got a better version of their ideas. Peer-assisted journals, so you can have the kids collaborate on journals on chart paper. Another great way to have kids to scaffold using a peer scaffold. And then consider the materials you're using. A lot of times I see teachers using that wide ruled paper or the college ruled paper. This is more in elementary, but a lot of kids aren't ready for that paper. And so if you see that their handwriting is poor, again, we don't go to kids and say, oh, your handwriting's so messy. Like, how could you do that? I'm noticing that your handwriting's a little messy. Like, can we give you a different tool to help you write more neatly? I really love dot paper for math and for science because if you need to draw tables or stack numbers, the dot paper can give you lines, that they can write words on, but it also allows you to, create those other things that we need to use in math and in science. So that was like a really quick summary of all the scaffolds. I want you to just think for a second about what you might be able to use in your classroom. Again, I think for a lot of people, if you're in that entry level of cognitive writing right now, sentence frames, and maybe a class journal where you're writing on the board in front of them, that's a great place to start scaffolding. Discourse is a great place to start scaffolding. So take a second to stop and jot in the chat. What scaffolds are you already using? And what will you try with regard to scaffolding writing? So you could use the sentence frame, I will try, or I am already, or this reminds me of. And while you're writing that, I see there's a question about multilinguals in here. Is there a way we can benefit multilingual learners more as well? Yes, all of these scaffolds are helpful, right? I think with multilingual learners, the word wall, you want to pair with pictures, right? You want to give them high frequency words. You want to give them really, really succinct sentence frames. I notice this in classrooms a lot. Teachers will offer a sentence frame and it will say, one thing I learned today was, well, that's really wordy. It's not actually great writing. And it's kind of like encroaching upon passive voice, which is not what we want kids doing. So instead of saying, one thing I learned today was, you can just say, today I learned. And that's actually more accessible for multilinguals, for students with disabilities, for kids who just struggle with writing in general. So you can consider the succinctness of or the succinct nature of your writing frames to make sure that you're not like giving them too much, right? And exhausting their cognitive load with all of these unnecessary words. Also, today I learned, those are high frequency words that we want them to learn anyway. Saying thanks for asking the questions about multilinguals. Great, I will continue with sentence starters. I'm already using sentence starters, that's great. This reminds me of the many uses of thinking maps and to include word walls in high school. Yes, 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 yes. I think sometimes we assume that because they're older, they know this stuff. If they knew, if they could, they would. And if they're not doing it, then that means we need to teach them something or give them a tool to help them do it. And a lot of these scaffolds are great for no matter how old they are, no matter how old they are. All right, we're coming up on time here. This is actually really quick, just describing that lesson structure that involves cognitive writing. I like to use a converge diverge lesson structure. So in that first 5 to 10 minutes, kids are making sense of the task together. Maybe that's where you're engaging them in discourse and offering them those sentence frames. They diverge, they go and grapple with the task, they write about the task. Then we come back together in the middle for another point of convergence. That's where we compare methods, we share what we wrote, we share what we thought, and we reflect. So in the math lesson before, right, my method was wrong. Right? My method did not get me to the right. I shouldn't say my method was wrong. My answer was incorrect. I did not get to the right answer. And I would have learned that through seeing other kids' examples. So after that point of convergence where we all come together and look at each other's methods, then we diverge again. And that's where kids can do the revising, the rewriting, the doing a second method. And then we can all come back together at the end of class for one more point of convergence to just synthesize, maybe consolidate, and have the whole class do a stop and jot and write a new learning statement. But this converge diverge lesson structure allows you to make sure that you're consolidating the important learnings that you need everybody to take away, but you're also giving kids space to grapple on their own and write on their own. Some kids are not ready for this much time diverging. And so then again, if they can, they would. And if they can't, then we need to teach them and offer a different scaffold. So if they can't work on their own for 15 minutes, what we do then is we scaffold the lesson structure. And we do 5 to 10 minutes of convergence. And then we allow them to work on their own for 5 minutes. Then we come back together for 5 or 10 minutes. We do more of a catch and release, more frequent converge and diverge lesson structure to really scaffold that and make sure that they're feeling successful. And then again, with time, right? We don't want to do that forever. With time, we want to go more towards this other converge diverge lesson structure where we're giving them more time to work on their own and grapple with a task with some independence. All right, I'm going to leave you with this big idea today. Again, it relates back to the idea of using AI and using tech. Writing with one's hand leads to greater brain activity. And this is actually very recent research. And I want to emphasize this because I get this question all the time, can we do digital journals? You can, you're the decision maker, so you can do, you can do whatever you want, within your school's constraints. But there is something to be said for pen and pencil, hand to paper writing, especially in the elementary grades and in middle school. So just consider that if kids are really struggling with writing, they might need to get off the screens and get a pencil in their hands. There are just some other frequently asked questions here, just about, do you have to use blank journals? No. If you are in that entry level, excuse me, and you want to use pre-existing resources, you can still apply the writing scaffolds to, workbooks and worksheets. I do think in that more ideal stage, right, we're giving them open-ended journals and they're writing more freely, but you don't have to use the blank journals. I like to have kids glue in tasks instead of giving them a predetermined set because we know how things go, right? Things change. And if you make a whole packet for them, you might notice a misconception and want to change the task. So that's why I like to have kids tape or glue tasks in. Then I get the question, well, isn't this a lot of prep? And, it's yes and no. I think that once you get in the swing of things, you can batch prep things and it becomes very sustainable very quickly. A lot of people ask about fill in the blanks. Can I write the sentence starter for them? And I just say, like, let's think about scaffolding. We don't want it to be restrictive. And so every single time you have them fill in the blank, you could be potentially, offering too much support and making them dependent on a fill in the blank, when in reality, we want them writing a whole sentence from start to finish. Determining what to model comes from baseline writing assessments. Again, if they can, they will. And if they can't, then we need to determine what they don't know so we can teach them that. And that's where those baseline writing assessments come in. And then teaching grammar, spelling, and other foundational skills is very, very important. Again, you're not going to know what you need to teach them until you do those baseline assessments. So doing a baseline spelling assessment, doing a baseline writing and fluency assessment, doing a baseline assessment to see what their sentence structure is like. You need to know all these things because then you can model those things in the context of academic tasks across all disciplines. I know we're a little bit over on time. So if you can, I would really appreciate if you either go to this short URL here or scan the QR code and leave me a little bit of feedback. You can also leave your email in there. And if you want to sign up for my mailing list, I can send you updates over the next couple of weeks. I'm really excited to release this book and share it with you all. And then you can also reach out to me directly at paul@maketeachingsustainable.org if you want to follow up on this, or if you want me to come to your school, work with your teachers. I would absolutely love to do that. But most of all, I really, really just appreciate you taking time this afternoon, to learn more about writing. I think we can all agree that it's something all of our kids need and it would benefit kids across the board. So I thank you so much for being here. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Olivia.
So thank you again to Paul, and thank you to everyone who joined us and participated today. Have a great rest of your week.